2 years ago, diesel outboards were hyped as the next revolution. Commercial skippers raved about torque, yacht crews loved single-fuel operations, and brochures claimed 30 to 40% better range. But then reality arrived. Resale collapsed, maintenance skyrocketed, and lightly used diesel outboards started appearing at auctions for shocking discounts, sometimes 60% below their original price. Today, we're uncovering why the diesel dream stalled so fast. If you're a private boater who's been eyeing a deal on a diesel repower, or a commercial operator wondering if the jump is really worth it, this could be the difference between a smart upgrade and a 5-figure mistake. By the end of this video, you'll see the forces that pushed diesel outboards into a corner, the engines that still hold up today, and the ones you should never touch unless you run a fleet. The diesel dream they sold you. If you only heard the marketing, the story sounded almost too good to question. Gasoline outboards were framed as thirsty, fragile, and tied to a more volatile fuel. They burn a lot, they need careful storage, and they demand their own dedicated tank on a larger vessel. Diesel outboards were positioned as the smarter evolution. According to the pitch, you could have big torque at low engine speeds, fuel burn cut by a healthy chunk at cruising, and a single, safer fuel running your tender, your generators, and your main engines. Names like the CXO 300 and the OXE diesel range appeared in glossy photos. They were shown on military rigid inflatable boats, long-range workboats, and gleaming super yacht tenders. The message was simple. These are the engines that real operators use. If you choose diesel, you are not just buying power, you are buying into a more serious league. The promise went even further. These engines were described as having life expectancies closer to heavy-duty commercial diesels than to lightweight gasoline outboards. The idea of running thousands of hours between major work while burning less fuel per hour is very attractive if you stare at spreadsheets for a living. On paper, the dream almost writes itself. You imagine your own boat, you imagine stretching range without enlarging the fuel tank, and you imagine fueling up at the same diesel pump as the sport fisher next to you while everyone else is wrestling gasoline cans. The funny thing is, if that dream translated directly into reality for most owners, you would see diesel outboards everywhere. You do not, and to understand why, you have to slow down the sales pitch and look at the pieces that were rarely put in bold: weight, money, and the first hairline cracks. Every powertrain choice eventually hits the wall of physics and finance. Diesel outboards hit both faster than most people expect. Start with weight. A modern 300 horsepower gasoline outboard from a big brand sits in a weight range that many 30-foot hulls were designed around. It is substantial, but the transom, brackets, and hull balance can cope with it. Swap that for a 300 horsepower diesel outboard, and you are now hanging something that can easily weigh hundreds of kilograms more than the gasoline engine it replaces. That extra mass sits right at the stern, the worst place to add weight. The bow lifts more readily, the boat may take longer to climb onto plane, and the hull can feel different in a chop. In some hulls, the difference is acceptable. In others, the balance feels like it has shifted from lively to sullen. You will not read that in a brochure, but you will feel it in your spine the first time you push the throttles down in a short, steep sea. Then there is the cost. The initial purchase price of a diesel outboard in the higher horsepower brackets is usually not a small step above gasoline. It can be a full level up. For a twin installation, all of those differences multiply. The engines themselves cost more. The controls, fuel system changes, and rigging add their own line items. By the time the quote lands in your hand, the total can easily reach into 6 figures for a pair of engines on a mid-sized hull. At that point, the only sensible way to stay on board is to tell yourself that the fuel savings, the longevity, and the residual value will pay you back over time. That might be true for a patrol boat, a water taxi, or a fish farm vessel that runs daily. It is rarely true for the owner who uses their boat on weekends and during a few holiday weeks each year. This is the first hairline crack in the dream. You do get something for the extra money and the extra weight, but it is not always what you think you are getting, and it does not show up for everyone in the same way. To see why, you have to look under the cowling. If this is giving you a clearer picture than the brochures, tap subscribe for the rest of the story. Inside the block, why diesel outboards are so demanding. From the outside, a diesel outboard looks like any other big, glossy engine. The real story starts when you think about what is happening inside the block, where a gasoline outboard uses relatively modest compression and lighter internal parts. A modern diesel relies on very high compression ratios and fuel injected at extremely high pressure. Combustion pressures are higher. Torque at low engine speeds is much stronger. The forces running through the crankshaft, gears, and propeller shaft are on another level. To survive that environment, the engine components have to be heavier and stronger. Pistons, rods, crankshafts, and bearings are built closer to commercial diesel standards than to lightweight recreational outboard standards. Gear cases and drive shafts must withstand huge twisting loads for long stretches of time. Even the mounts that secure the engine to the boat have to tame more weight and more vibration. Some designs use clever layouts, like keeping the diesel engine upright and driving the free propeller through belt transmissions and separate gearboxes. That can help place the weight where they want it, and it allows them to borrow proven blocks from automotive or industrial applications. It also means there are more moving parts between the piston and the propeller, and each extra part brings its own manufacturing cost, its own maintenance needs, and its own failure modes. From a pure engineering perspective, a well-executed diesel outboard is a beautiful compromise. It is an attempt to strap serious industrial power into a package that can tilt, trim, and be bolted to a bracket like any other outboard. But that beauty comes with a bill. The engines are heavier, more complex, and built to a standard that is not cheap to design or manufacture. When everything is working, you feel the result as easy thrust and relaxed cruising. When something goes wrong, you feel it as a specialized service call and a parts invoice that does not look anything like what you are used to seeing for a gasoline outboard. And that leads directly into the next part of the story, the one that really sells people on diesel in the first place. The fuel story that almost works. Fuel is the one part of the diesel pitch that does not really need any spin. Diesel engines genuinely can be more efficient than gasoline engines at a given power output, especially at steady cruise. On similar hulls, run at similar speeds, it is common to see a diesel package burn noticeably less fuel per hour than an equivalent gasoline setup. That difference shows up directly in the distance you can run on a given tank. For a commercial boat that runs long routes every day, the math can look compelling. Over the span of a season, a boat burning diesel could use many thousands of liters less fuel than it would on a gasoline engine. Multiply that over several years and several hulls, and the savings stack up. For those operators, the fuel story is not hypothetical. It is one of the largest costs they deal with. There is also a safety and handling element. Diesel is less volatile than gasoline. On larger vessels that already store large volumes of diesel for main engines and generators, not having to store any gasoline at all is attractive. It simplifies fuel logistics and lowers the risk profile of the ship. The catch is that many private boat owners do not live in that world. Their boat may see 100 hours of engine time in a good year, and far less in a busy year on land. Their fuel bill, while painful on a long weekend, is not the same as a commercial operator pouring money into tanks every single day. If you are only burning modest amounts of fuel each season, the reduction you get from a diesel outboard may add up to a few thousand units of your local currency over quite a few years. That is not nothing, but it is set against a purchase price, a maintenance cost, and a resale picture that all pull in the opposite direction. So the fuel story does work. It is just incomplete. It works brilliantly for a small set of users and not nearly as well for everyone else. And you can start to see that pattern if you spend some time talking to the people who have already walked down the diesel path. Stories from the dock, when the numbers turn personal. On paper, it is all charts and tables. On the dock, it turns into very specific stories. You will find the commercial skipper with a long, narrow hull and a crew to pay. They know their routes, they know their fuel burn, and they know they will be underway nearly every day the weather allows. For them, a diesel outboard is a business decision. They accept the higher upfront cost because they fully expect to earn it back in fuel savings and extended engine life. When a part fails, it goes into a maintenance budget. Annoying? Yes. Surprising? No. Then there is the private owner who saw the same advertisements and could not stop thinking about them. They have a center console or a small offshore boat that used to run twin gasoline engines. Maybe they had a couple of expensive repair seasons and started to feel burned, Maybe they like the idea of being a little different from every other hull at the marina. A twin diesel repower becomes this exciting, slightly secret plan. The day the boat comes back from the yard, it is hard not to be impressed. The engines look serious. The throttle response feels different. At cruising speed, the fuel gauge is dropping more slowly than it used to. For the first year, almost everything they tell their friends is positive. But owning a boat is about long, quiet intervals as much as it is about launch day. The first scheduled maintenance on a diesel outboard can be a surprise if you are used to gasoline shop rates. The technician has to be trained on that specific platform. The parts catalog is more expensive, and in some areas, the dealership map is thin enough that you are always aware of how far you are from the nearest authorized shop. Later, when a higher pressure fuel pump shows a fault code or an electronic control module needs attention, the conversation changes. The service queue is longer than they hoped. The boat sits. The invoice for parts and labor is larger than they imagined when they were picturing long range and diesel fumes instead of gasoline. None of this makes diesel outboards bad. It simply reveals that they were never designed around the occasional user. They were built for machines that live on the water, not for boats that mostly live on trailers or in marinas. And all those experiences come to a head when that owner, for any reason at all, decides to sell. That is when the dream collides with the used market. If this is already making you rethink that too good to be true diesel listing, tap like so more boaters see this before they sign a bill of sale. The quiet resale problem. If diesel outboards were as universally desirable as they look in marketing, used listings featuring them would be chased by buyers, with cash in hand. In reality, the reaction is more complicated. A typical used boat buyer knows what a gasoline outboard is, roughly what it costs to service, and roughly how long it can be expected to last. They feel reassured by the fact that they can find technicians from multiple brands in most boating regions. When that same buyer sees a listing with a diesel outboard on the transom, a few questions naturally appear. Who will work on this engine near my home port? How much does a major service actually cost? Will this particular diesel outboard still be produced and supported 10 years from now? What happens if the manufacturer abandons this specific model line? If the seller can answer those questions clearly, the sale can still go smoothly. But if the answers turn out vague, or if the buyer senses that the local dealer network is thin, caution creeps in. Caution usually turns into one of two outcomes: a much lower offer, or a quiet decision to keep looking for something simpler. You can already see individual cases where owners of diesel-powered tenders or small boats accept significant discounts compared with the original repower cost, or decide to keep the boat because the offers they receive never quite feel fair. It is not that the engines do not work, it is that they belong to a niche, and niches always bring friction when you step outside them. Now, imagine you are considering a diesel outboard repower today. You have to decide not just whether you like how the engine feels and sips fuel right now, but how you think the market will view that engine 5 or 10 seasons from today. That requires more than faith in the brand. It requires faith in the whole ecosystem around it. The dealer support, the regulatory climate for diesel, and the appetite of future buyers to take on something more complex than the boat parked in the next slip. Where diesel outboards actually make sense. So far, this may sound like a long argument against diesel outboards, but that would not be accurate. There are situations where they are not just valid, they are almost the obvious answer. The first is in government and defense work. Many military and paramilitary organizations prefer to run a single fuel across their fleets. Diesel-powered rigid inflatable boats, patrol craft, and interceptors can refuel directly from larger ships or shore tanks that were never set up for gasoline. For these users, a diesel outboard is less about fashion and more about logistics and safety. The engines spend their lives at sea, and the crews around them are used to diesel systems. The second is hard commercial use. Fish farmers, crew, transfer operators, survey companies, and water taxi services all burn fuel at rates that would make most private boaters dizzy. For them, shaving a chunk off fuel consumption is not a nice to have, it is a survival issue. If a diesel outboard can run all day, every day, and stretch the fuel budget without constant breakdowns, the premium they paid for those engines can be justified over a realistic span of time. The third is high-end yachting. Large yachts and super yachts already live in a world of diesel. Their main engines, generators, and systems were designed for it. when they deploy a tender or a chase boat. The ability to refuel from the mothership is more than a convenience. It can be a safety feature in remote areas. The crew staffing those yachts often includes engineers and mechanics who are not intimidated by a computer-managed diesel outboard. In these three worlds, the usual complaints about weight, cost, and service networks sound different. The budget is larger, the usage is more intense, and the mindset is more professional. A diesel outboard is treated as a piece of commercial equipment first, and an object of desire second. If you do not live in any of those worlds, the calculus changes drastically. The same engines that make perfect sense on a patrol boat or fish farm can become slow, expensive mistakes on a family center console. And that, more than any glossy photo, should guide your own thinking, regulations, emissions, and a narrowing path. There is one more current running beneath all of this, and it has nothing to do with torque or range. Diesel engines have been under pressure in many countries for years. Concerns about nitrogen oxides and particulate emissions have driven regulators to tighten standards and push manufacturers toward cleaner, more complex combustion and exhaust systems. On land, that has meant particulate filters, selective catalytic reduction systems, and entire generations of engines designed around emissions first and everything else second. Marine rules are structured differently, but the direction of travel is familiar. Emissions limits for marine diesels tighten over time, and the larger the engine and the market, the more scrutiny it tends to attract. Outboard diesels sit in an odd corner of that world. They are small in number, but they are visible, and they are part of a technology that is, in many people's minds, already on probation. For a big gasoline outboard line sold in large volumes, absorbing the cost of meeting new regulations is painful but survivable. The research and development is spread over many units. For a niche diesel outboard range sold into a narrow commercial and governmental market, the same level of engineering effort buys you fewer sales. That does not mean diesel outboards are doomed. It does suggest that their manufacturers will have to be very careful about which segments they serve and how big those segments really are. If regulations tighten faster than anticipated, or if political pressure against diesel grows, some products may quietly fade away. Owners of those engines will still be able to run them for a long time, of course. Marine engines do not vanish when a catalog changes, but parts support, software updates, and dealer enthusiasm can slowly erode. That long tail is something gasoline outboard owners rarely think about. Diesel outboard owners do not have that luxury. If you are considering one of these engines, you are not just betting on how it will run this season. You are also betting, in a small way, on the future of diesel itself in the recreational and light commercial marine world. No one can tell you exactly how that will play out. You have to decide how comfortable you are with that uncertainty. So, should you ever go diesel on your transom? By now, the headline promise behind diesel outboard engines probably sounds very different from the way it looked on the first brochure. The shocking part is not that the engines do not work. Many of them are deeply capable machines doing hard work every day in tough conditions. The real shock is how narrow the target has always been. If you are running a commercial hull hard, piling on hours, counting every liter of fuel, and operating in a world where diesel is already the default, a diesel outboard can be a rational, even smart choice. You will still feel the sting of high purchase and service costs, but you have a real chance of earning that money back in fuel savings and lifespan. If you are running a government or defense fleet, the single fuel policy and the ability to support your engines with trained staff and spare parts make diesel outboards almost unavoidable for certain roles. They are a tool that fits the job. If you are the average private boater with a family and a favorite bay, the answer is very likely different. A modern gasoline outboard might not feel as exotic, but it will cost less to buy, be easier to service, and be far easier to sell down the road. It will fit into a service network that already exists in most places you will trailer or cruise. So, should you go diesel on your own transom? The honest answer is that if you are still wondering after hearing all of this, you probably should not. When diesel outboards make sense, the case is usually obvious. When the case feels fuzzy, it is often because the numbers and the realities do not really line up for your situation. Still, there will always be a few owners who are drawn to the idea of owning something different, something that feels like it escaped from the commercial world. Some of them will be happy with that choice. Some of them will quietly put their boats up for sale a few seasons later, and discover how small the club really is. If this helped you look past the glossy brochure and really see the trade-offs hiding underneath, consider subscribing, because there are more engines, more myths, and many more uncomfortable truths on the way. And now that you have heard the case for and against putting diesel on the transom, there is only one question left. If someone offered you a set of diesel outboards tomorrow, would you actually say yes? Or would you quietly stick with the kind of power you already know? Next week, we are going inside Honda's 2026 Outboard lineup, a deep dive that could change boating forever. That is episode 72, and you will not want to miss it.